Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. We're producing this episode for GoodCrowd.info. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Amy Cortese. She is the author of Locavesting, a journalist, an all-around wonderful human being, an expert on crowdfunding. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Devin.
We're thrilled to have you. Amy, tell us a little bit about your history, starting with your book and how you built your business around that.
Yeah, well, I guess, it's been a progression, but my book came out in 2011. It's called Locavesting. I have a copy here. But the genesis for that, for me as a journalist, was the financial crisis when so many communities and livelihoods were just devastated by that whole experience. And, Wall Street kind of got off scot-free. And, here we were like years later, people and communities still trying to climb out of it. So I noticed, there was a lot of grumbling, right? Everybody was grumbling about Wall Street. But there were, I noticed people out there actually trying to create alternatives to Wall Street in ways that people could move some of their money, at least from Wall Street, into their communities and maybe help rebuild them. So that was the genesis for the book. It came out in 2011. And I kind of chronicled this local investing, community capital movement, and the people that were doing that. But honestly, at the time, there wasn't a lot you could do. I mean, there was slow money movement. There were some things like CDFIs, which a lot of people still have never heard of, unfortunately, because they do great work. There were some direct public offerings, but not very many. There were some community-supported enterprises, but they were sort of one-offs. So when the Jobs Act was signed into law the following year after my book came out, that was really the first time that there were mainstream ways, at least once that law got implemented, right? There would be mainstream ways where people could invest in their communities. So as it turns out, it took 4 years for all of that to fall into place. So finally, last May, the last piece, as you know, right, of the Jobs Act went into effect, and that was regulation crowdfunding. And so now it's possible for any American to invest in any small business that is raising money that way. So for the first time, we really have these mainstream ways to do that. So, after that, there was so much interest in this topic of local investing that I launched, I'm not even sure, a couple of years ago now, the Locavesting.com website is sort of a way to cover this in real time. So it's a media and educational site. And I like to think of it as the intersection of financial innovation and community. So there's a lot of financial innovation that we hear about in the so-called fintech space, financial technology, but very often it's aimed at things like Bitcoin and robo-advisors and all sorts of things. So how do we take some of that innovation and apply it to this world of localism and local economies and new economies? So people, working to make the world a better place. And there's a lot of really great models sort of bubbling up. And that's what I try and do with Locavesting.com is spotlight some of those models that people are experimenting with or that are working so that other communities can replicate them and not have to reinvent the wheel. We also provide a lot of advice for entrepreneurs and investors in this new world of crowdfunding and crowd finance.
So tell us about your latest project with Investibule.
Yeah, thank you. So that is, again, sort of a natural progression. When I started Locavesting.com, I always had hoped that, rather than just providing people with information, I would be able to actually connect them, help them act on their desires to invest more meaningfully. And so as we, just said, now finally we have ways that you can do that thanks to the Jobs Act and other alternatives that exist and are arising. So I had bumped into a longtime friend and colleague, Arno Hess, who I've known from the Slow Money movement and Bali, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies community, and he runs a site called Credibles, which is a prepay site. You can kind of have a house tab at your favorite businesses, and it turns out he'd been wanting to do the same thing. So we joined forces, and we've created Investibule. It's in beta now at investibule.co, but really the best way to think about it is as a kayak for community capital, right? So we're it's great that there are all these crowdfunding sites and opportunities for people to invest in community-based businesses, but guess what? Most people have never heard of crowdfunding, much less, would they know the 12 or 15, and growing different sites to go to look for investments that might fit their interests. So we kind of bring all that together onto one easy-to-use site with the aim of making it really easy for people to discover community-based investments, and then when they want to invest, we pass them over the wall to that particular funding site.
Yeah, I want to step back for a minute, Amy, with you, and just talk a little bit about. I want to focus for a minute on the problems. What are the problems that you look out across the landscape and see that worry you? Why you get up every morning and do this because you think it's solving a problem? What's the problem?
Okay, well, where to begin these days, right? One of the biggest problems I think we face as a country is this enormous wealth gap, right? It's big and getting bigger. And that's particularly a problem for communities of color, underserved communities, rural communities. I just read Hillbilly Elegy, right? There are a lot of, it's not just African American and Latino communities, it's a lot of white communities. But there is this enormous wealth gap. And how do you begin to address that? And, there's just such a concentration of power where, money seems to rise to the top, and there's this sort of corporate capitalism that has taken root. So how do we get to a sort of more fair economy that shares wealth more broadly? People talk about shared prosperity. And, the funny thing is, I was never a financial person, right, by background, but I do really feel like that is the root of it. You have to start with finance because it's all about where the capital flows. So, it's interesting too, to when you want to start to address this inequality, you have to give people more economic opportunity, right? And African American women are the single fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. But guess what? They, also struggle probably the most out of anyone to raise funding for these ventures. So they're not going to have a good chance of success unless they can get that capital. So that's why I think some of these new forms of capital, crowdfunding, new sorts of CD products that are targeted at African Americans, Force for Good Accelerator in Oakland, like there's just a lot of really exciting stuff going on that's beginning to address that lack of capital.
Yeah, you think about African American women and venture capital, and they get virtually none. And I think the reason is pretty clear. Venture capitalists for a long time have used what they perceive to be as an unbiased filter, which was, if you can get a good introduction to me, I'll sit down with you and talk to you about your deal. Mm-hmm. But that seems so objective on its face that it's only a question of ingenuity and networking. But that is a very different task for a white guy than it is for a black woman. The black woman is far less likely to know someone who knows a venture capitalist, whereas a white guy, even if he's fresh out of college, you know, he may have a father who knows a venture capitalist, his dentist. I mean, all kinds of people in his network are likely to know a venture capitalist, whereas an African-American woman is really, quite frankly, very unlikely to know anyone that knows a venture capitalist. So it's a very great problem. So how do you see crowdfunding addressing that?
Well, you know, crowdfunding, its promise, and we'll see, is, you know, to be the great equalizer, right? To get rid of the gatekeepers and let entrepreneurs raise money on their merits and reach out to their friends and family, their community, their supporters, their, you know, the broad network of people who believe in what they do or believe in them. I mean, it's not a panacea, though, and I want to be clear about that, because the other problem is a lot of these communities, I mean, you look at the household wealth of the average American household is 140,000 roughly. For an African-American household, it's 11,000. For a Latino household, it's only slightly more than that. So, you know, you have to have that network of support, and a lot of times those communities don't have a lot of disposable income to give, right? And in crowdfunding, that first 20% usually comes from your friends and family, and it's instrumental to your success. So I think we need to think about new models there. How can we, you know, sort of intervene at that point? I mean, are there, you know, could foundations or other entities come in and match some of that money that the community is able to put together? You know, and then there are other people coming at it differently. Like there's a group, Kevin Jones, Conda Mason, Jessica Norwood, a whole group of really smart people putting together something called the Friends and Family CD to make up for, you know, the lack of that rich uncle and you know, relatives with 140 grand in household wealth. And so that, you know, that's another sort of intervention here to get around that lack of community wealth that we have right now. But long term, right, the more successful entrepreneurs you have in those communities, the more wealth they build, and that problem hopefully goes away over time.
Let me ask you just a couple of personal questions. First, Amy, you are really a role model in this space. I mean, you really are famous.
I say that to everyone.
Crowdfunding circles, and I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. But who do you look up to for inspiration? Who's your role model?
Honestly, I think it's the people out in the field who are doing all of these things, the people that I tend to write about that really inspire me and are my role models. You know, I've mentioned some of them, the people behind that Friends and Family CD. Derek Brazil in Cincinnati, he's got this great organization called Mortar, and he and his team are just amazing, and they're doing so much with entrepreneurs in underserved areas there. In Oregon, Amy Pearl has been like a one-man band around their interstate crowdfunding law, but also the whole infrastructure around it, you know, putting together a boot camp and meetups and spreading the word about it. So there are so many people like that. I wouldn't point to just one, but those are the people that really kind of inspire me and honestly make my job enjoyable.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, Amy, you're super talented, and you could be doing anything, writing about anything, covering anything. Why this?
It just matters, right? It matters to me. And now more than ever, I have a hard time reading the news these days. I find it very disturbing. And I feel like all of us have to think about what we can personally do in the world to affect change and to have an impact and to hopefully make things a little bit better. And I think the best way to do that is in our own communities, like the people I mentioned before that I admire so much, or in my case, as a journalist, writing about inspirational and successful and real people out there with real solutions. And unfortunately, that doesn't get covered a lot in the mainstream press, and especially lately when it's all, about politics and all the not so great stuff going on lately.
Yeah, there's some scary news out there. Last question for you, Amy. You are amazing. What is your superpower?
My superpower, love casting.
Love cast?
Okay, so I'm kidding, but it's a common typo for Locavesting. It's very funny. I've had badges at conferences that say love casting on them, and I don't know what it is, but I think it sounds like a great superpower. And if what I do can help spread a little bit of love and connection and hope within communities, then I'm all for that. So yeah, I'm going to go with love casting.
Oh, that's great. Well, Amy, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, please tell people how they can get a copy of Locavesting, how they can find your website, connect with you personally.
Great, thank you. Locavesting.com, and it's one L, right? Locavesting, like locavore. Investibule.co is the new venture where you can find investment opportunities in your town or your community of interest. That's in beta, so please be kind if it's a little slow right now. And me personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Locavesting. I also have a Locavesting Facebook page, and I'm on LinkedIn, so very easy to find.
Fantastic. Well, Amy, thank you very much for being here with us today. We wish you every success in your effort to improve access to community capital.
Thank you, Devin. You too.
All righty.
Let's
do some good.
Okay, take care.